It was a rainy Tuesday morning at Riverside Memorial Hospital. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly and the smell of antiseptic hung in the air. In the pediatric ward waiting room, a young black woman sat quietly, holding her little boy close. Her name was Dr. Angela Brooks, though no one in that room knew that yet. Today, she wasn't there as a doctor. She was there as a mother. Her son Ethan was 7, coughing softly into a tissue. Angela rubbed his back, whispering, "It's okay, baby. We'll see the doctor soon." Across the counter, the receptionist barely looked up. "Name?" "Brooks," Angela replied. "Ethan Brooks. 10 o'clock appointment." The woman typed slowly, chewing gum. "Insurance?" Angela handed over her card, her own insurance from the very same hospital network. "All right," the receptionist muttered. "Take a seat. The doctor will call you when he's ready." Angela smiled politely and sat down. She was used to being underestimated. Her calm tone, her soft-spoken confidence, often mistaken for weakness. When Dr. Stephen Carrington finally stepped into the room, his white coat crisp, his chin lifted high, he looked at her briefly, then at her son. "Mrs. Brooks?" "Dr. Brooks, actually," she corrected gently. His brows lifted and a faint smirk crossed his face. "Ah, you're a doctor, are you?" She smiled faintly. "Yes." "Of course," he said, his tone dripping with polite disbelief. "Why don't you bring your son in?" As they entered the exam room, the tension thickened. Dr. Carrington went through the motions of the checkup, efficient, impersonal, condescending. He asked questions but didn't really listen, cut her off mid-sentence, and when she suggested a diagnosis, he chuckled. "Mrs. Brooks," he said firmly, "I've been doing this a long time. Let's leave the medical opinions to the professionals, all right?" Angela's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. "Of course," she said softly. He scribbled something on his clipboard. "You know, I meet a lot of parents who exaggerate what they do for a living. You'd be surprised how many people claim to be doctors because they took a few online classes." She met his gaze calmly. "I'm not exaggerating." "Right," he said with a thin smile, "and I'm the president." Angela didn't respond. She just looked at her son, soothing him as the doctor continued his routine. By the time the appointment ended, her patience had worn thin, but her dignity stayed intact. She thanked him politely, took her son's hand, and left the room quietly. Dr. Carrington watched her go, shaking his head. "People," he muttered under his breath. What he didn't know, and what he couldn't have imagined, was that in less than a week, that same woman would be standing in front of him again. Only this time, she wouldn't be in the patient's chair. She'd be sitting in the director's office. The next Monday morning, Riverside Memorial Hospital buzzed with restless chatter. Nurses hustled between stations, residents checked charts, and whispers traveled faster than the sound of rolling gurneys. Something was happening. Emails had gone out late Sunday night. Mandatory staff meeting at 9 a.m. Main conference hall. Attendance required. New administrative leadership announcement. No one knew what it meant. Some speculated about budget cuts. Others guessed a merger. But most assumed it would be the same kind of speech they'd heard a dozen times before. Dr. Stephen Carrington strode down the corridor, his stethoscope bouncing lightly against his chest, coffee in hand. He was in a good mood. He'd had an easy morning, his schedule was light, and frankly, he liked meetings. They gave him an excuse to show off his opinions. As he entered the conference hall, he spotted a few familiar faces. "Any idea what this is about?" he asked a nurse named Clara. She shrugged. "Rumor is, they're bringing in a new hospital director. Some big change from corporate." Stephen smirked. "Great. Another bureaucrat with no idea how medicine actually works." He took a seat near the front, crossing one leg over the other. Around him, murmurs grew louder as the room filled to capacity. Then, at exactly 9, the chief medical officer, Dr. Lee, stepped up to the podium. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice formal but upbeat. "Thank you for being here on short notice. As you know, Riverside has been under review for new leadership to help us move into a more progressive, inclusive, and patient-centered future." Stephen stifled a yawn. "Buzzwords," he muttered under his breath. Dr. Lee smiled. "It gives me great pleasure to introduce our new hospital director, a highly respected physician, researcher, and leader in healthcare administration. Dr. Angela Brooks." The room went silent. For a moment, Stephen thought he'd misheard. The name hit him like a quiet explosion. Then, the doors at the back of the hall opened, and she walked in. Angela Brooks, poised, calm, radiant in a tailored navy suit. No white coat this time, no patient clipboard. Just confidence. She stepped up to the podium, shaking hands with Dr. Lee as polite applause began to spread across the room. Stephen sat frozen in his chair, his face pale, his mind racing. It can't be her. It can't be the same woman. But it was. Her voice carried smoothly over the microphone, warm but strong. Thank you, Dr. Lee. It's an honor to join Riverside Memorial, a hospital with an incredible legacy and, I believe, even greater potential. She paused, scanning the crowd. Her gaze swept across the room and landed just for a moment on Stephen. Their eyes met. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. I started my medical career not far from here, she continued, and I've learned that the true strength of any hospital isn't in its technology or its funding. It's in the way we treat people, our patients, our staff, each other. The room was silent, captivated. Angela smiled gently. Respect should never depend on titles or assumptions. It should be the foundation of everything we do. A few heads nodded. Even the nurses who'd often felt invisible sat up straighter. Doctor, Brooks concluded, I'm excited to work alongside all of you, to listen, to learn, and to build a culture where every person is valued for their skill, their dedication, and their heart. Together, we'll make Riverside a place we can all be proud of. Applause filled the room, genuine, thunderous, sustained. Stephen clapped mechanically, his mind spinning. His face burned with shame as fragments of their last encounter replayed in his head. His smirk, his dismissive tone, his patronizing, let's leave that to the professionals. Now she was the professional, the one signing his checks, approving his budgets, evaluating his performance. As the staff began to disperse, Angela stepped down from the podium, shaking hands with department heads and nurses. When she finally reached Stephen, he stood quickly, forcing a smile. Dr. Brooks, he said, his voice unsteady. Congratulations, I had no idea. Her expression was calm, unreadable. I'm sure you didn't, she said softly. Then, with perfect composure, she added, I look forward to working together, Doctor. And just like that, she moved on, leaving him standing there, humbled, speechless, and painfully aware of the lesson he'd just been handed. By midweek, Dr. Stephen Carrington could hardly focus on his rounds. Every corridor, every conversation, every passing nurse seemed to carry a quiet echo of embarrassment. He wasn't sure if anyone else remembered that day in pediatrics, but he couldn't forget it. The memory haunted him. Her calm correction, it's Dr. Brooks, actually. His smirk, his tone, his disbelief. And now every morning he had to walk past her new office, the one with the gold placard that read, Dr. Angela Brooks, hospital director. He avoided eye contact whenever she passed, always pretending to check his pager or look at charts. But Angela? She was different. Composed, courteous, professional. She treated him no differently than anyone else, which somehow made it worse. That Friday afternoon, as he reviewed charts in his office, a knock came at the door. He looked up. Come in. The door opened, and there she was. Angela Brooks, elegant, calm, holding a folder under one arm. Dr. Carrington, she said, do you have a moment? He stood immediately. Of course, Dr. Brooks, please. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Come in. She sat gracefully, crossing one leg over the other. I wanted to speak with you directly about the pediatric unit. We've received a few reports from parents about communication concerns. He nodded, trying to steady himself. Yes, I've seen some of those comments. We've been addressing... She raised a hand gently. Stephen. Her tone wasn't cold, but it was deliberate. This isn't just about paperwork. It's about empathy. He swallowed hard. I understand. Do you? She asked softly. He met her gaze, and for the first time saw not anger, but quiet authority. Angela continued, her voice even. When I first met you, I was in this hospital, not as a director, but as a mother. I watched how you spoke to me, how you dismissed me, because of what you thought you knew. Stephen's stomach twisted. Doctor, Brooks, I. She held up her hand again, calm but firm. Please, let me finish. He nodded. I'm not telling you this to humiliate you, she said, but because it matters. You treated me like my voice didn't belong in that room. That's not just a bad habit, that's a dangerous mindset in medicine. Her words struck like truth wrapped in calm. Stephen lowered his eyes. You're right, he said quietly. I was arrogant. I judged you, and I'm ashamed of it. Angela studied him for a moment. I don't need your shame, doctor. I need your change. He looked up again, surprised by the gentleness beneath her strength. She continued, I'm implementing new sensitivity and leadership training across all departments. But I don't want this to feel like punishment. I want it to be growth. He nodded slowly. You want me to take it. I want you to lead it, she corrected. His head jerked up. Lead it. Yes, she said, you're respected here. You have skill, authority, and visibility. If you stand up and say that empathy matters, people will listen. He stared at her, stunned. After how I treated you, Angela smiled faintly. That's exactly why it'll mean something. The room was silent. For the first time, Stephen felt the weight of her grace, not pity, but power used with purpose. He nodded slowly. You have my word, he said. I'll do it, and I'll do it right. Angela stood, offering her hand. Good. Let's start by rebuilding from where we fell. He took her hand, the gesture steady, but full of humility. Thank you, Dr. Brooks. She met his eyes. Thank me by doing better, not for me, but for every patient who trusts you enough to tell you their story. When she left the room, Stephen sat down heavily, staring at his reflection in the dark monitor screen. He wasn't proud of who he'd been, but for the first time, he saw who he could become, and maybe, just maybe, that was what leadership was supposed to do. The following week, the hospital's auditorium was transformed. Rows of chairs faced a large projection screen, and a banner hung above the stage that read, Empathy in Medicine, Building Trust Beyond Diagnosis. Doctors, nurses, and administrators filed in reluctantly. Most of them came because they had to, not because they wanted to. The words mandatory training had a way of draining enthusiasm from even the most compassionate professionals. At the podium stood Dr. Stephen Carrington, his white coat pressed, his notes shaking slightly in his hand. He had led countless medical briefings before, but this one was different. This time, he wasn't teaching about disease or data. He was teaching about himself. When the room finally settled, he cleared his throat. Good afternoon, he began, his voice steadier than he expected. I'll be honest, when I was first asked to lead this session, I didn't think I was the right person. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. He nodded. But maybe that's exactly why I am the right person. He set down his notes and spoke from the heart. I've spent years in this hospital. Years focused on outcomes, numbers, success rates. I thought being a good doctor meant being right. But I forgot that before a patient sees your skill, they feel your tone. The room grew quiet. He continued, A few weeks ago, I made a mistake. Not a clinical one, a human one. I judged someone before I listened. I assumed I knew who they were based on what they looked like. And in doing so, I violated the very oath I swore to uphold. He paused, the silence thick. That person is now our hospital director. A ripple of realization spread through the crowd. Some nurses exchanged glances. A few doctors straightened in their seats. Stephen looked toward the back of the room, and there she was, Dr. Angela Brooks, standing quietly near the doorway, watching. Not with judgment, but with quiet strength. She didn't fire me, he continued softly. She gave me a chance to do better, to be better. And that's what I'm here to ask of all of us. He turned toward the audience. Empathy isn't weakness. It's precision, emotional precision. It's seeing the person before you see the problem. A few heads nodded. A nurse wiped at her eyes. He smiled faintly. I can't undo the mistake I made, but I can make sure it teaches me, and maybe teaches us all, how not to repeat it. When he finished, the room erupted into quiet applause. Not the forced kind, but the kind that grows from respect. Angela walked toward the stage, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She took the microphone, her voice calm but firm. Thank you, Dr. Carrington, she said. What you just did, is what real leadership looks like. Not perfection, but accountability. She turned to the crowd. We can't treat patients with compassion if we don't treat each other with it first. Empathy starts in the hallways before it ever reaches the bedside. Then she looked back at Stephen. This hospital doesn't need flawless people. It needs honest ones. The applause grew stronger, echoing through the room. Afterward, as people filed out, several doctors approached Stephen, some with awkward smiles, others with quiet words of encouragement. One of the nurses said, "That took guts, Doc. I respect that." Stephen nodded, humbled. "Thanks. I've got a lot to learn." Angela lingered by the door as the crowd thinned. When their eyes met, she smiled. "You did well," she said. He smiled back, this time with genuine warmth. "I just told the truth." "That's usually the hardest part," she replied. As she turned to leave, Stephen called after her. "Dr. Brooks, thank you for giving me this chance." She looked over her shoulder. "Don't thank me, just pass it on." And with that, she walked away, leaving behind not shame, but something far more powerful. A spark of change. 3 months passed, and the change at Riverside Memorial Hospital was more than just a slogan on a banner. It was visible in the hallways, the patient rooms, the break rooms. The nurses spoke up more during case discussions. Young residents asked questions instead of pretending they already knew. And Dr. Stephen Carrington, once the loudest, most impatient voice in the room, had become something unexpected. A listener. He had begun mentoring interns, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds. He spent extra time with them, not lecturing, but guiding. One afternoon, he found himself in the pediatric ward again, the same room where his lesson had begun. He was reviewing charts with a young resident named Dr. Maya Ellis, a black woman in her late 20s, bright and brilliant, but clearly nervous. "Dr. Carrington," she said hesitantly, "I think we should test for bronchial inflammation before we rule out pneumonia." He glanced at her, remembering the old version of himself, the one who would have dismissed her suggestion instantly. Instead, he nodded. "Good call. What made you think of that?" She blinked in surprise. Pattern of coughing frequency and oxygen drop. It doesn't fit typical pneumonia progression." He smiled faintly. "Good catch. Let's add that test." As she walked off to prepare the order, Stephen stood there for a moment, thinking about how far he'd come. Not long ago, he would have cut her off mid-sentence. Now, he'd just witnessed what trust could build. But change, as Angela always said, only mattered when it was tested. And the test came sooner than anyone expected. That evening, the hospital was thrown into chaos. A massive traffic accident on the freeway sent multiple victims flooding into the ER, stretchers rolling in one after another, the air thick with shouting, alarms, and adrenaline. Stephen rushed into the trauma bay, barking orders, controlled, sharp, focused. "We need 3 IV lines here. Prep for surgery. Where's anesthesia?" He moved between patients like instinct, but when he reached one particular stretcher, he froze. A child, no more than 7, unconscious, pale, covered in blood. It hit him like a punch. Ethan. For a split second, he saw Angela's son, that same little boy who'd coughed softly in his office months ago. It wasn't him, but the resemblance shook him to his core. Then, he heard Angela's voice behind him. "What do we have?" She had rushed down from administration, her suit jacket still on, her eyes fierce and focused. Stephen took a breath and snapped back into motion. "Male, age 7, blunt chest trauma, internal bleeding suspected. I've ordered a CT and surgical consult." Angela moved beside him seamlessly, steady hands, calm tone. She wasn't just an administrator now. She was a doctor again. "Good," she said. "I'll stabilize vitals. You coordinate surgery." For the next 20 minutes, they worked side by side, silent, synchronized, efficient. No titles, no hierarchy, just medicine. When the child was finally stabilized and rushed to surgery, Stephen exhaled shakily. Sweat rolled down his temple. Angela turned to him, her voice soft but strong. "You handled that perfectly." He shook his head. "No, we did. You didn't hesitate." She gave a faint smile. "Neither did you." They stood in the hallway for a long moment, both catching their breath. The chaos around them faded into the distance. Stephen said quietly. Months ago, I would have been more focused on impressing people than saving them. Angela looked at him thoughtfully. And now? Now, he said, I just want to be worthy of this coat. She smiled, not with superiority, but pride. That's how I know you are. As they walked back toward the ER, the sound of heart monitors and hurried footsteps filled the air. But beneath it all, something deeper pulsed through the hospital, a rhythm of empathy, discipline, and respect. For the first time, the building didn't just feel like a place that treated people. It felt like a place that believed in them. Spring sunlight poured through the high hospital windows, casting soft light on the freshly painted walls of Riverside Memorial. The hospital had changed, not in design, but in spirit. There was laughter in the halls now. Nurses smiled more. Patients noticed. But even progress has to be tested. It happened on a Thursday morning during a rush hour in the ER. A new nurse, Janelle Wright, young, soft-spoken, and recently transferred from a smaller clinic, was handling intake for a middle-aged patient complaining of chest pain. She moved quickly, efficiently, her voice calm. But the attending physician, Dr. Mark Hensley, frowned. You're sure that's the right dosage? He asked. His tone wasn't curious. It was skeptical. Yes, doctor, Janelle replied confidently. Based on his weight and vitals, he cut her off. I'll double-check it, just to be safe. The words hung in the air. Just to be safe. The universal phrase that meant, I don't trust you. When she stepped away, her eyes shimmered with embarrassment. She caught Stephen's glance from across the room. He had seen the whole thing. Once, he would have done the same thing. Now, he couldn't stay silent. He walked straight over to Dr. Hensley. The mark, he said evenly. What's the issue with Nurse Wright's calculation? Hensley shrugged. No issue. I just like to double-check things. You know how it is. Some nurses overestimate. Stephen's expression hardened, though his tone stayed calm. She didn't overestimate. She followed protocol, exactly. Hensley frowned. Relax, Steve. No harm done. There is harm, Stephen said quietly. Every time we treat competence like luck, every time we question someone's ability because of how new they are or who they are, we harm the team. The surrounding nurses stopped what they were doing, listening. Hensley's voice dropped. You're really making a thing out of this. Yes, Stephen said simply, because I used to make the same mistake, and I know what it costs. The silence that followed was sharp and heavy, the kind that could either divide or heal. Finally, Hensley looked away. Fine, he muttered. You're right. My bad. Stephen turned to Janelle. You did great. Stay confident. Her shoulders relaxed. Thank you, doctor. He smiled. No, thank you. You caught something the rest of us might have missed. The moment was small, but the meaning was enormous. Later that day, Angela heard about the incident from one of the nurses. She waited until her rounds were over, then found Stephen sitting on a bench outside the cafeteria sipping coffee. I heard what happened downstairs, she said, taking a seat beside him. He glanced at her modestly. Word travels fast. Good news does, she said with a soft smile. You handled that beautifully. He shrugged. I just remembered how it felt to be on the other side of that conversation. Angela looked out the window where sunlight hit the hospital courtyard. Yet that's leadership, Stephen, not control and awareness. You took what hurt you and turned it into something healing. He smiled faintly. You know, a few months ago, I probably would have snapped back or stayed silent. Guess your training's working. Angela chuckled. It's not my training. It's your choice. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two colleagues, equals, watching patients and staff move through the courtyard below. Dr. Brooks, Stephen said finally, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't crossed paths that day? Angela thought for a moment. I think we still would have met. Life has a way of bringing people face to face with their lessons. He nodded slowly. Then I'm grateful for mine, she smiled. Me too. For a moment, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the hospital around them. A place once divided by hierarchy, now connected by humanity. Summer came softly to Riverside Memorial Hospital. The courtyard trees bloomed bright green, the lobby filled with light, and for the first time in years, the hospital didn't feel cold or mechanical. It felt human. The change hadn't come from new policies or posters. It came from people. From Angela. From Stephen. From everyone who had learned that empathy was more powerful than ego. That morning, the hospital gathered for its annual recognition ceremony, a tradition that had once felt obligatory, but now carried pride. Staff from every department filled the auditorium. Nurses, residents, surgeons, janitors, cafeteria workers. For once, every seat mattered. On stage stood Dr. Angela Brooks, her posture poised but warm. She scanned the faces before her. Faces that, months ago, barely looked up from their phones during meetings. Now, they leaned forward, engaged, connected. She smiled. When I first arrived at Riverside, she began, I saw a hospital that was excellent on paper, but divided in practice, brilliant doctors, dedicated nurses, and yet walls between them. Her eyes softened. But walls can be rebuilt into bridges, and that's exactly what you've all done. Applause echoed through the room. She continued, this year, patient satisfaction scores are the highest they've ever been. Staff turnover has dropped by half. And more importantly, people are listening to each other. From his seat near the front, Dr. Stephen Carrington listened quietly, pride flickering in his chest. He never liked ceremonies, but this one felt different. It felt earned. Angela's tone grew more personal. Change doesn't begin with a policy. It begins with a person. Someone brave enough to say, I can do better. Someone willing to turn their mistake into a lesson. She paused, her gaze landing on Stephen. This year's Humanity and Leadership Award goes to Dr. Stephen Carrington. For a heartbeat, the room went silent, then erupted in applause. Stephen froze, blinking in disbelief. He hadn't expected this. He rose slowly as the crowd clapped and cheered, nurses smiling, residents nodding with respect. Angela handed him the award. A simple crystal plaque engraved with, for transforming humility into hope and leadership into compassion. Their eyes met, and for a moment the entire story replayed silently between them. The arrogance, the apology, the forgiveness, the growth. He took the microphone, his voice steady but full of emotion. I don't deserve this, he began softly. Angela smiled. Yes, you do. He looked at the audience. I used to think being a doctor meant never being wrong. I was wrong about that too. Being a doctor, being human, means never stopping the work of becoming better. The crowd erupted again, louder this time. When the ceremony ended, Angela found herself standing by the window overlooking the courtyard. Stephen approached quietly. Still don't think I deserve it, he said, smiling faintly. Angela turned to him. Then you've truly earned it. They stood there for a moment, watching nurses guide patients, interns trading laughter, sunlight spilling across the marble floors. This place feels different, Stephen said softly. It is, Angela replied, because now people see each other. He nodded slowly. You changed everything. She looked at him kindly. No, we did. Outside, the hospital bustled with life. Not perfect, but alive, full of stories like theirs. People learning, healing, growing. As Angela walked back toward her office, she passed the new motto engraved on the lobby wall: respect, compassion, truth. The Brooks Principle. She smiled quietly, not because it carried her name, but because it carried her purpose. And for the first time in her long, hard-earned career, she didn't just feel like she'd earned her position. She felt like she'd fulfilled it. Because real power isn't in being obeyed, it's in being understood. And that day, every heartbeat in Riverside Memorial carried her lesson forward. One patient, one doctor, one act of grace at a time.